Most people frame poverty as nothing more than a lack of money. I think that view is incomplete. Poverty is not just a number in a bank account. Poverty behaves like a gravitational force. It is a trap. It is a closed-loop system that keeps people inside, spinning their wheels until they run out of energy. I think of it as the physics of poverty. If you want to understand why people stay stuck, you really have to understand rocket science. When a rocket tries to leave the Earth, it fights gravity. We call that escape velocity. To reach orbit, it must hit a specific speed. If the rocket uses almost all of the fuel but still misses that speed, it does not get 99% of the way to the moon. It falls back to Earth and crashes. That is exactly what happens to a great many working people. You work hard. You save a little money. You try to climb out of the hole. You get halfway up the wall. Then something happens, the car breaks down, you get sick. The rent goes up at the practical level. Gravity kicks in because you never reached escape velocity. You fall all the way back to the bottom. You often fall lower than before because now you are discouraged, tired, and carrying even less fuel. That is why working a little harder often does not work. Inside the physics of poverty, linear effort can produce no lasting result. To break the gravitational pull, you need far more force than most people imagine. That is not because of a conspiracy. It is because of mathematics. Poverty is expensive. When you are poor, almost everything costs more. You cannot buy in bulk, so you pay a higher unit price for food. You cannot afford good boots, so you buy cheap boots that break every year. You cannot afford the dentist while the problem is still small, so you wait until the tooth rots and the bill becomes far larger. This is what people mean when they talk about the boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness. A rich man can buy one pair of high-quality boots for $50 and wear them for 10 years. A poor man only has $10, so he buys the cheap pair. The cheap pair falls apart after 1 year, so he buys another pair the next year and another pair the year after that. Over 10 years, the poor man spends $100. The rich man spent $50. The poor man spent twice as much money, and his feet were wet the entire time. That is the mathematics of being poor. The system charges you a penalty for lacking capital. It charges late fees. It charges overdraft fees. It charges high interest rates. It charges you a premium because you are perceived as a risk, so you are running a race with a heavy backpack, while wealthier people are running with the wind at their backs. The most dangerous part is this. Poverty is not only external, it becomes internal. When you stay trapped in this loop for too long, it changes the way your brain works. It puts you into constant fight or flight mode. You stop planning for 10 years from now and start worrying about 10 minutes from now. You become reactive instead of proactive. That is the poverty cycle. Low income leads to stress. Stress leads to bad decisions. Bad decisions lead to no assets. No assets lead back to low income. Round and round it goes. A perfect vicious circle. But there is a way out. The laws of physics can be broken if enough force is applied in the right direction. To escape, you must understand the 5 chains holding you down. The scarcity tax that drains your brain. The dopamine trap that steals your cash. At the practical level, the linear income trap that wastes your time. The social gravity that pulls you back into the bucket. The compound void that keeps you standing on the wrong side of the engine of wealth. Once you break orbit, everything changes. The friction falls away, the silence comes. You can finally move. But first you must survive the launch. The first loop is the scarcity tax. Most people think that if you simply hand a poor person money, the problem is solved. Sometimes it helps. Often it does not solve the structure. For that reason, lottery winners can receive millions and still be broke again in a few years. Poverty is not just a lack of cash, it is a lack of cognitive bandwidth. When your mind is consumed by financial stress, your processor is damaged, you are trying to solve long-term problems with a brain stuck in survival mode. You cannot see far into the future because you are too busy fighting the present. That is the scarcity trap. When your bandwidth is limited, your decisions become worse. You take the high-interest payday loan because you need cash now. You buy the unhealthy food because it is cheap and fast. Now, It is not always stupidity. Very often it is exhaustion. And the system knows how to exploit exhaustion. And that is why the first move is so plain. Build a cash cushion. Your first financial goal is not to get rich. It is not to buy a house. It is not to invest in the stock market. Your only goal at first is to save $1,000 or even $500 if that is where you need to begin. Put it in a separate account and plainly do not touch it. That money is not for spending. It is for buying back your brain. When you have a cash buffer, the car breaking down becomes an inconvenience instead of a disaster. When you have a reserve, you simply do not have to take the payday loan. You stop paying the scarcity tax on every emergency. You stop reacting to every disruption and start managing it. That $1,000 buys something more valuable than gold. It buys cognitive bandwidth. It gives you back sleep. It lets you look up from the ground and finally see the horizon. At the practical level, most people try to jump straight to investing. That is a mistake. They are trying to build a skyscraper on a swamp. You have to drain the swamp first. You have to build the cash cushion first. You have to buy the boots that last 10 years first. Yes, it requires sacrifice. Yes, it requires pain for a few months. You may have to live like a monk for a while, but you are doing it for a reason. You are buying your breathing room from the scarcity tax. The second loop is the dopamine trap. This is the emotional one. People say, if you are poor, why do you have the newest phone? Why do you buy expensive sneakers? Why do you eat out when you have groceries at home? It is easy to judge from the outside. It is harder to understand the biology. When you are trapped in the poverty cycle, life hurts. Your stress is constantly high. You feel small. You feel invisible. Your brain is screaming for relief. It is screaming for a win. So when you walk into a store and buy the new pair of shoes or the branded handbag, your brain releases dopamine. For a few minutes, the pain goes away. For a few minutes, you feel successful. For a few minutes, you feel like you matter. That is not ordinary spending. That is self-medication. You are using consumption as an anesthetic to numb the pain of your reality. But that is the trap. The relief is temporary, the debt is not. The dopamine fades in 20 minutes. The credit card bill can last for years. That is one of the fundamental differences between how the poor and the rich often use money. The poor often see money as a way to buy relief or pleasure. The rich are more likely to see money as a way to buy independence. When a poor person gets $500, he often asks what he can buy with it. When a rich person gets $500, he is more likely to ask how he can invest it. This is assets versus liabilities. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out. If you buy a designer purse, that is a liability. If you buy a share of stock, that is an asset. It keeps working while you sleep. Most people in the low-income trap are drowning in liabilities. They have the nice car, the nice clothes, at the practical level, the subscriptions, the gadgets. They look rich, but they are bleeding wealth every day. They are feeding the dopamine monster while starving their future. So how do you break this loop? You need a detox. You need monk mode. Not forever. A temporary reset. For a period of time, you cut everything. You cancel what is unnecessary. You stop eating out. You stop buying clothes. You stop paying for little emotional rewards. You strip life down to food, shelter, and basic transport. It will be boring. It will be hard. People may laugh at you, but you really have to tell yourself the truth. I am not poor. I am in training. When you stop getting dopamine from spending, your brain starts to rewire itself. You begin finding satisfaction in seeing the bank account grow. You begin getting a different kind of dopamine, the dopamine of control. Once you realize you simply do not need the new phone to feel alive, you become dangerous. You become free. Because the system can no longer manipulate you with shiny objects. You have broken the addiction. The third loop is the linear income trap. Most people are taught a simple equation. Time equals money. If you want more money, work more hours. Get the second job, work overtime, drive for Uber on the weekends. But there's a fatal flaw in that equation. Time is finite. You only have 24 hours in a day, and your body has limits. That means your income is mathematically capped. Your expenses are not. This brings us to one of the silent killers of the working class. At the practical level, inflation. Inflation is a tax on people who sell their time. When money is printed and prices rise, bread costs more and gas costs more, but wages do not really adjust immediately. Wages are sticky. Your boss may wait a year or two before giving you a 3% raise, and by then inflation may already have eaten far more than that. So you are running up a down escalator, you work harder. You miss your child's birthday, you damage your health. And at the end of the year, you can be poorer than when you started. You cannot win that game simply by playing harder. You have to change the game. You have to stop selling time alone and start selling value. That is how you build a skill stack. Most people try to become the best at one crowded thing. That is hard and crowded. A better move is often to become pretty good at 2 or 3 unrelated skills and combine them. That is how someone like Scott Adams became unique. He was not the best artist, not the funniest writer, not the best businessman, but he was good at all 3, and the combination made him unusual. If you are a low-income worker, do not just get a second job flipping burgers. That is more linear income. Use your monk mode time to learn a second skill. If you work construction, learn sales. Now you are not just labor. You are a contractor who can close deals. If you are a waiter, learn copywriting. Now, you are not only carrying food, you can also design menus that sell high-margin items. You must become a double threat. When you stack skills, you detach your income from your hours. You become harder to replace. You become an asset rather than a commodity. The market pays for rarity more reliably than it pays for effort. If you can be replaced by a teenager or a robot in a week, you will remain vulnerable. You have to build a moat around your income. That moat is your skill stack. The 4th loop is social gravity. This may be the hardest chain to break. There is an old saying that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. There is a lot of truth in that. If your closest friends are broke, cynical, and unambitious, that environment will shape you. Human beings are imitation machines. We copy the language, behavior, and mindset of the tribe around us. So if you are trying to escape poverty while surrounded by people who have accepted poverty, you are fighting a very hard battle. At practical level. That is one reason the crab bucket image matters. Put 1 crab in a bucket, and it may crawl out. Put 10 crabs in the same bucket, and when one tries to escape, the others pull it back down. They simply do not do it because they are all evil. They do it because your success makes them feel unsafe. Your escape highlights their imprisonment. When you start monk mode, when you start saving money, when you start learning new skills, your old friends may not applaud. They may attack, they may tell you to relax, they may say you think you are better than them, they may say the game is rigged, so why bother? That is the sound of social gravity. That is the bucket trying to keep you inside. So you must protect your mind. I am not saying you really have to be cruel to the people you love. I am saying you cannot let poisonous inputs occupy your whole day. You need a better tribe. And because you live in the age of the internet, that tribe does not have to live next door. You can spend your time with better minds through books, interviews, biographies, and lectures. You can read Munger. You can read Einstein. You can read the greatest builders in history. When you do that, you are downloading a new operating system into your brain. You are choosing better standards. You are choosing better mirror neurons. A new mental neighborhood often comes before a new physical neighborhood. The 5th loop is the compound void. This is the engine of wealth. If you are trapped in the poverty cycle, you are probably standing on the wrong side of this equation. You are paying compound interest. You have credit card debt at 20%. You have car loans. You have student loans. The math is working against you. Every day you wake up, you are poorer than the night before, even if you did not spend a dime. You are paddling upstream, and the current is stronger than your arms. The wealthy are on the other side. They earn compound interest. They own the S&P 500. They own real estate. At the practical level, they own businesses. Every day they wake up richer than the night before, even if they slept all day. That is the snowball effect. If you want to escape low income, you must stop being the person who pays interest and start becoming the person who earns it. You must cross the line. How do you do that? You follow 3 stages of escape. Stage 1 is survival. This is where you stop the bleeding. You cut expenses to the bone. You use your monk mode savings to pay off high-interest debt. You kill the vampire that is sucking your blood. Stage 2 is accumulation. This is where you start buying assets. Not a house you cannot afford. Not a car you cannot sustain. I mean productive assets. Take $10 a day, just $10, and put it into a low-cost index fund. Ignore the noise. Ignore the flashy trends. Buy a piece of the economy and let it grow. You are building your own snowball. It will look small at first. It will even look pathetic. You must trust the math. Stage 3 is breathing room. This is the moment when your assets generate enough cash flow or support to cover your basic survival needs. This is escape velocity. This is the moment you break the gravitational pull. This is the moment you no longer have to sell your time just to stay alive. This is when you finally have options. This is when you have dignity. If I review the whole poverty cycle, I see the same 5 chains: the scarcity tax, the dopamine trap, the linear income trap, the social gravity, the compound void. These are the chains that bind people. But remember this: at the practical level, chains may be made of metal. The strongest ones are forged in the mind. The door to the cage is not locked forever. The system wants you to stay inside. Your friends may want you to stay inside. Your own fear certainly wants you to stay inside. But the physics can still work in your favor. You have the map. You only need the courage to walk out. This is why the trap feels so demoralizing. The person inside it is not only losing money, he is losing momentum. And once momentum is lost, even a simple setback feels heavier than it should feel. A family that had almost started believing in progress suddenly has proof, at least emotionally, that progress is fragile. That emotional cost is part of the mathematics too. Discouragement changes behavior, fear changes timing, exhaustion changes judgment. All of those things make the next mistake more likely. That is one reason, in my view, poverty should be discussed with more precision. People talk about it morally when they should often talk about it mechanically. The poor are not always losing because they refuse to move. Very often they are losing because the slope is steeper than outsiders imagine, because their margin for error is smaller than outsiders imagine, and because the price of one mistake is larger than outsiders imagine. When you finally see that clearly, a lot of cheap advice starts to sound cheap. The line that poverty is expensive is not rhetoric. It is description. It means the household without cash reserve is forced into bad timing over and over again. It means the person who could not afford the larger package pays more per S-heat, more per ounce, more per M-onth, and more per year. It means the household that could not afford durable quality is sentenced to repeated replacement. It means weakness is not only painful, weakness is billable. That is exactly why a buffer matters so much. Most people hear the phrase emergency fund and think it sounds small. In my view, the first reserve is one of the biggest psychological upgrades a household can buy. $1,000 does not solve all of life. It does something more foundational than that. It interrupts panic. It reduces the number of decisions that have to be made from fear. It gives the household one precious ability that poor households often lack. It gives them the ability to pause. That pause changes everything. A person who can pause can compare. A person who can compare can choose. A person who can choose can finally act like a planner instead of a victim of the next interruption. And that is how the scarcity tax begins losing some of its power. The cycle of poverty is not broken in one leap. It is weakened chain by chain. The dopamine trap is weakened the same way. In my view, many people underestimate how humiliating a trapped life can feel. When a person feels overlooked long enough, the desire to buy some visible symbol of worth becomes very strong. A nice object can feel like a correction. It can feel like proof that you are not invisible. It can feel like evidence that you are not losing. And that is why this kind of spending can look irrational to outsiders and still feel emotionally necessary to the buyer. But necessity is not the same as usefulness. That is where discipline enters. Discipline is not mainly self-punishment. Discipline is choosing not to let a temporary emotional need become a long-term financial wound. It is choosing not to buy one evening of relief with 2 years of monthly obligations. It is choosing not to let identity be rented from brands, financed cars, and little performances of status. For that reason, monk mode can be so powerful. It is not only about cutting costs, it is about changing the source of reward. At the practical level, if the brain can stop celebrating the shopping bag and start celebrating the growing reserve, then the whole inner economy shifts. Saving starts feeling satisfying. Debt reduction starts feeling satisfying. Simplicity starts feeling satisfying. Once that happens, the market loses one of its easiest ways to manipulate a person. The linear income trap has a similar cruelty. It flatters effort while quietly exhausting the worker. A person can feel honorable because he is working nonstop and still be losing ground in real terms. The worker feels productive. That makes the trap emotionally deceptive. The household feels stretched. Both things are true at once. The effort is real. The result is weak. That is one reason the equation has to be changed. The skill stack is not just a career trick. It is a survival strategy. It is how a person increases the value of the hour without increasing the number of hours forever. It is how a worker begins to convert labor into leverage. It is how income begins to rise without demanding a matching increase in exhaustion. Once that shift starts, the household finally gains room to do something more than merely endure. That room is precious, because room is what allows ownership. Without room, all money is spoken for before it even arrives. With room, a little capital can finally be directed toward an asset instead of toward another emergency. And then the compounding equation starts to change. The social gravity section matters because almost no one climbs alone. A person may understand the math perfectly and still be dragged backward by the emotional pressure of a weak environment. If everyone near you mocks discipline, then discipline begins to feel like arrogance. If everyone near you worships appearances, then a plain life begins to feel like failure even when it is financially wise. This is why the environment around the mind has to be treated as part of the budget. Bad inputs create bad decisions just as surely as high-interest debt does. A better tribe does not always arrive immediately in physical form. Sometimes it begins as a reading habit. Sometimes it begins as a voice in an interview. Sometimes it begins as a biography that gives a person a more mature standard than the one available in the room around him. That may sound abstract. It is not abstract. Inputs become thoughts. Thoughts become standards. Standards become behavior. Behavior becomes outcomes. This is why better ideas are not a luxury purchase. They are part of the escape plan. Then, finally, the household reaches the compound void. This is where everything either starts helping or keeps hurting. A family that keeps paying 20% interest is not simply servicing debt. It is feeding a machine that gets stronger while the family sleeps. A family that begins even the smallest habit of buying cash, producing assets, is not merely investing. It is beginning to move to the better side of a machine that also gets stronger while the family sleeps. For that reason, stage 1 matters. And that is why stage 2 matters. This is why stage 3 matters. People want breathing room first because breathing room is the most attractive word. But freedom rests on survival and accumulation, the way a roof rests on walls. If the walls are not there, the roof is fantasy. Survival means the household stops leaking. Accumulation means the household finally starts owning. Freedom means enough ownership exists that labor is no longer the only pillar holding up the whole life. I would say many people become impatient right there. They want the snowball to look impressive too early. But snowballs are never impressive in the beginning. They are only impressive to people who understand what repetition can do. $10 a day looks absurd to a person who worships spectacle. It looks serious to a person who understands compounding. The same is true of debt reduction. Small progress looks boring in the month it is made. Over years, boring progress becomes a different life. That is exactly why the final summary matters so much. The scarcity tax drains the brain. The dopamine trap drains the wallet. The linear income trap drains time. At the practical level, the social gravity drains ambition. The compound void drains the future. Once a person sees these chains clearly, his problems stop looking random. The loop becomes visible, and when the loop becomes visible, the exit begins to look real. That does not mean the exit is easy. It means the exit is intelligible. And once a person has a map, a real map, he no longer has to confuse motion with progress. He can start applying force in the right places. That is exactly why I would always choose clarity over comfort. Comfort without clarity keeps people trapped. Clarity, even when it hurts, gives a person the chance to build the force required for escape. In the end, the real victory is not simply having more money. It is standing outside the loop. It is looking at life and knowing one bill cannot destroy the month. It is knowing one employer cannot destroy the year. It is knowing that time, once the enemy, has finally become an ally. That is what orbit means in ordinary life. That is what escape velocity buys. And that is why I believe this subject matters far more than most people realize.